Welcome to Coast View, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such an amazing place to live, work, and play. It's Friday. I hope you're having a great day. We're going to go to Jeff Duncan here in just a second. I just want to real quick do a shout out to my producer, Cal Curley. Every single day he's here with us. You can set your clock on Kyle. Over 800 shows together. I think there's really probably only been less than 10 that we had someone else filling in. The rest of the time it's Kyle. He had to go out to a transmitter site this morning to meet a service guy on the generator. And just another reminder that he has IT responsibilities and operations responsibilities and does music in the Superdome during Saints games. And you hear his voice on the air all the time. This guy's a jack of all trades. I'm just thrilled to have my buddy Kyle here with me every single day. I wouldn't be here, to be quite frank, if it were not for Kyle. So thank you, my buddy. I can see him through the video. Okay, so let's move over to my friend Jeff Duncan from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune and continue to talk about the flurry of activity at the Saints, man. They went into this free agency with a plan. And, it continues to make new chapters it's almost like every single day. But anyway, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, Ricky. You're right. It's kind of a busy time of year. It's funny. I wrote my column last week about the growing dominance of the NFL and how the offseason, there is no more offseason. It's almost as big as the regular season, the free agency and draft, and we're in the thick of it right now.
Well, I can't help but recall that you reminded us all that there's no typically anymore, especially as it relates to the Saints, that they were kind of quiet in free agency. You didn't really expect them to go out there and do a bunch of stuff. But, given obviously they've lost some players, some of them they probably planned to lose, others they hoped they wouldn't lose, but they did. They knew they knew where their vulnerabilities were going to be, and they had to act on those. But they've been extraordinarily aggressive, haven't they?
Yeah, well, they have, like you said, they had, I think, 23 players that were going to be unrestricted free agents. So they were going to have a lot of roster holes. And this is typically how they do act, is they go aggressively and get the targets that they have early, Derek Carr being, of course, the number one guy, and a couple others along the defensive line they targeted. And then they usually, knowing Mickey Loomis, the general manager, how he operates, he's very much a poker player. And he'll wait it out till the second phase of free agency. And that's what they're in right now. These guys that are signing now are all kind of backup type players, filling out the depth at different positions with veteran talent. They're not going to be world beaters, but they're guys you need on the roster. They have to fill out depth, and they eventually will end up probably playing prominent roles for you because of injuries. But this secondary phase is kind of filling out the roster. What the Saints like to do typically, Ricky, is fill every hole they can before the draft. That way they're not desperate in any way to fill a need. They can just get the best players, no matter what position they play, when they're on the board for their pick. That's always how they've operated, and that's kind of what they're doing right now.
Yeah, it was good. I was happy, I don't know about you, to see Malcolm Roach sign to a one-year deal. That's going to help us, in the interior of the defensive line. But, you're pretty high on him, weren't you?
Yeah, he's a Baton Rouge native, was a big high school recruit, ended up going to the University of Texas, played well there, but was another one of these kind of undersized guys for his position that didn't get drafted. And Jeff Ireland identified him, and they've developed him. And, he's part of the rotation inside. I still think that they'll address defensive tackle in the draft. I think that's an area that they might even address in the first round. There's a lot of good defensive tackles. That's an area that I know they want to improve. And I know they lost David Onyemata and Shai Tuttle, so it's an area that they need to improve, especially in the run defense more than anything else. They haven't gotten a lot of pass rush out of their defensive tackles the last couple of years. That's an area that really in the NFL is a growing trait. If you can find interior pass rushers, and I think that's something that Malcolm Roach brings to the table. He's a good interior pass rusher and a guy that certainly has played a lot of snaps in the last few years.
It's interesting. They keep making some moves on the defensive side. We got a former first round draft choice from the Raiders, Jonathan Abram. What's your thoughts about him?
Well, that falls into the category of the old Bill Parcells philosophy. It's a trickle down from Sean Payton and Parcells and Dennis Allen and Jeff Ireland, obviously following that principle. And that is, look, if the guy was a first round draft pick at one point, he obviously had talent. And so, look, if he hasn't panned out in other, buildings and other clubs, let's see if we can get the most out of him here. It's very similar to what they did with Jameis Winston. He was number one pick in the draft, didn't work out in Tampa. Let's see if we get him in our building, in our culture, in our coaching. Maybe we can get more out of him. And I think that's what they're trying to do with Jonathan Abram. Jonathan Abram was a disappointment with the Raiders. There's no doubt about it. I mean, he hardly ever played for them once he lost his starting job, and he's bounced around a couple of camps. So, again, this is a guy I wouldn't bank all your hopes on. He's got a big name. He's a Mississippi kid. But there's a reason he's bounced around 2 or 3 teams and is available in the secondary phase of the draft. He's going to provide depth for the Saints at a key position for them, and they'll see if they can get something out of him.
And let's face it, Dennis Allen's a defensive coach.
Yep.
He's really good at bringing out the best in his players, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. So he knows what he's getting in terms of raw talent. Now, will he be able to kind of put it all together? As you pointed out, it's worth the risk, that's for sure. We got another defensive back called Lonnie Johnson, and he was saying he needed to get to New Orleans as soon as possible. What's your thoughts about him?
Well, he fills that role that they've had the last few years. Ricky, you've probably seen P.J. Williams play that role. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson played a little bit where they're kind of a hybrid cornerback safety, kind of a jack of all trades. Justin Evans played it last year very well. Justin Evans ended up signing with the Philadelphia Eagles this week. So Lonnie Johnson's a big corner. He can play outside. He can play inside. That's what Dennis Allen likes. A lot of coaches like that now in this league is finding versatility, flexibility, guys that can play multiple positions. He's a guy that's played a lot of football. Unfortunately, he's a University of Kentucky product, so University of Louisville guy like me is going to have a little bit of a downgrade for him. Otherwise, though, he's a guy that fits in the traits that Dennis Allen likes: versatility, flexibility. If you get some injuries, which are going to happen, he can play a lot of different spots to help you plug in. But he's probably, again, just like Abram, a bench player that's going to play a role in the rotation.
I had the opportunity earlier this week to do a speech for the Leadership Gulf Coast alumni breakfast, when they bring all the people who went through the Leadership Gulf Coast program back together again for a breakfast. And it was a terrific opportunity to see a bunch of old friends and to talk about leadership. And one of the quotes that I shared, I sort of immediately thought of you, Jeff, and also the Saints and things that you said before about how much one player, the right player in the right place, can make a difference in this league. And here is a quote by Andrew Lloyd Webber, obviously the great musical composer. And here's what he said: "There's a very fine line between success and failure. Just one ingredient can make a difference." And, the NFL has proven that over and over and over again, haven't they?
Yeah, I think of that even less on the NFL side this past year as I do watching what happened with Tulane, right? I mean, Tulane had one of the greatest seasons in the history of their college football program. I think it's one of the great stories in college football. And the year before, they won 2 games. And they brought back most of the same players. But there was just something about the culture, the chemistry, that ingredient that he's talking about, something about it that caught fire last season. And it's this alchemy that's very hard, I think, to identify. But you could see it. When you went to the Tulane games, I could see it on the sidelines, in the body language. You could see the confidence, the belief that the players had. And it carried them all the way to the Cotton Bowl, where they beat Southern Cal and ended up in the top 10 of the country. So, yes, definitely that can happen if you get the right people in the building. And I think the intangible aspects are so hard to define. This is the time of year, Ricky, where we're seeing all these videos on social media of the workouts of the draft prospects. And look, I get into it as much as anybody else, but the longer I've covered the league, the more I realize that the intangibles are really what I think separates the really great teams, the great players, from the good ones. And that's not going to be on a social media, video. You're going to find that out over the long haul. And I think the Saints understand that better than anybody.
Well, it's interesting. Again, it could make you're talking about intangibles. It may be Derek Carr is the quarterback we need, but the intangibles he brings to the table, the good fit he is, the leadership he brings to the table, could make a very significant difference, especially given for the last couple of years we've been working so hard to get some concrete person in that position who can really contribute. Hey, listen, we're visiting with Jeff Duncan from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. When we come back, we'll boil down a little bit deeper into a column he wrote about the NFL building this unbelievable entity that has become sort of this force to be reckoned with. And also, Jamal Williams is a great fit. His personality is a great fit for New Orleans. We'll talk a bit more about that as well. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Coast View. It's Friday on Coast View, and we always enjoy our visits with Jeff Duncan from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. Incidentally, if you haven't signed up for their Saints newsletter, I highly recommend it. Their team's doing just an incredible job. Hey, we'll come back to this column that you wrote about about Roger Goodell building what you called an indestructible Goliath, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But let's come back to the point that I was making. This new running back we've gotten, Jamal Williams, who led the NFL in TDs last year. Every time, my son likes personality. My son Jordan loves to see leadership inside the organization. And one of the points that he made was when, unfortunately, Alvin Kamara's got legal issues to deal with now. He's got obviously suspension that he's going to have to deal with. But if you go back to before, maybe in a year 2 or 3, man, his personality was starting to come out. Ingram and him were this kind of cool little team where they were doing fun stuff together. When Ingram left and then came back, I don't think they ever put that back together well. I don't know. I'm not sure why that was. But could you see Alvin Kamara without his legal problems and Jamal Williams together sort of being what used to be in terms of Ingram and Kamara? Have you given any thought to that?
Well, I do think there's no doubt. I mean, you have to have two great running backs in today's game. I mean, we saw it here for a long time with Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara. And I think Jamal Williams is going to play a very prominent role, especially considering the legal aspects that Alvin Kamara is facing. And he's got a ebullient personality, very, very much captures your attention on camera. He knows that. It's natural for him. So I think he's going to become a fan favorite very quickly. He's a very good player, too. I mean, to me, he's like maybe a very similar, maybe a little more productive version of Latavius Murray. And we saw how good he was here the last few years. I don't think he's going to score 17 touchdowns. I mean, that was a blip on the radar for him last year. But he's a very good, solid, capable running back in this league. And the Saints have lacked that opposite Alvin Kamara because Mark Ingram's been the oldest running back in the league the last 2 years. It's just at some point you drop off a little bit physically. And Jamal Williams, I think, will become capable of being the lead back when Alvin Kamara is out and then become a really powerful 1-2 punch when Kamara comes back.
Well, listen, there are other moves that have been made, and we'll come back to some of those, like interesting kind of back and forth between Blake Gillikin and Derek Carr over his jersey number, et cetera. But you did write this column about the NFL and what it has become, and it is described in the headline, Indestructible Goliath. But my goodness, man, it is a machine, isn't it?
Well, I just noticed it at the gym the other day when we were in the middle of March Madness. I think it was last Thursday. The tournament was tipping off. And, the talk shows on ESPN and Fox Sports, all the national sports talk shows, their leadoff lineup, Ricky, was all NFL stories. I mean, it was all NFL because it drives the needle. It's what people want to talk about it. And I found these numbers, as you probably read in the column, of the most watched programs, television programs in the United States last year in 2022, the 100 most watched programs, 82 were NFL games. I mean, that's insane. In a day and age where we're seeing fewer and fewer people watch TV, these numbers were staggering how dominant it was. Just average regular NFL games are outdrawing the championship games of the other sporting events. So it really shows the popularity that Roger Goodell has engendered and built. It seems almost insatiable. And I know it's been a strategy for the NFL in the last decade or so to build up the offseason. That's why we see the draft become so popular, how they divided it up over 3 days now, extending it out. The same with the NFL scouting combine. That's become almost a must-see TV. The schedule release now is a TV show when they announce when the games are being played. It just seems like it never ends, and everyone eats all of it up. And I don't know where it's going to end, but that's something that's changed dramatically since when I started covering the league in 2000. I mean, the offseason was pretty much a downtime. It's not the case anymore.
No, it's so interesting. It's so interesting. Hey, listen, one thing you and I haven't talked about in a while, actually, were the charges against Marcus May, which have been dropped. What's your thoughts about still having to deal with some disciplinary issues from the NFL?
Yeah, I think he'll definitely face some kind of suspension. It might not be more than 2 to 4 games, but I think he's definitely going to face something. I'll be surprised if he's not. It doesn't require any kind of conviction for the NFL to weigh in on a matter like that. This is the second incident that Marcus May's had. So that often goes into the formula when they try to mete out discipline for a player like this.
So what's your thoughts about the possibility of us doing some joint practices with San Diego Chargers? I think
Los
Angeles Chargers.
Yeah, Los Angeles Chargers. Yeah, you're still old school. I like it.
Once it's in your head, you can't get it out.
I know. Well, look, they have a familiarity there. They've worked together as an organization. I think it was 2018, 19, and 20. We went out there, and the Saints worked against the Chargers then. They're going to do it again this year. Probably won't be officially announced for a few weeks or maybe even a couple months. But logistically, they're already working on, getting hotel rooms for the players and, working that out. It's become very popular now that they've kind of reduced the exhibition game schedule, right? You're down to 3 games in the preseason. More and more teams like to do these joint practices. It's become almost a staple around the league, and that's a very good team. You get to work against Justin Herbert, one of the top quarterbacks in the league. So it ends up being a very productive week of workouts, and it breaks up the monotony of training camp where you're working against each other, and that'll precede a preseason game against the Chargers, probably in SoFi Stadium the second week of August.
Well, I think it'd be good. And, of course, man, the Chargers got a great quarterback. Be a good test for our defense, that's for sure. Hey, listen, our former colleague and dear friend Jim Amos's brother is one of them is not only a horse racing expert, but the other is a doctor for the Saints, I might add. And I noticed the story this morning where Foster Moreau, young Jesuit graduate, was going through Saints Physical, and they discovered Hodgkin's lymphoma. Man, I mean, it's probably a good thing that he was going through that physical, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a pretty extraordinary story. And, hats off to John Amos in the work he did. I mean, this is a player that's not even on the Saints. He's just coming in for a routine physical, which is what you do when you're a free agent. When you visit teams, they always make you go through a medical exam. And he red flagged that and led to some more tests, which identified the cancer. And so Foster Moreau now is going to step away from football for a while and obviously treat this condition. It is treatable, but it'll require him probably to step away from football for a while. He's going to try and make a comeback. It's his initial thoughts, but obviously a very scary situation that could have gone unidentified if it wasn't for John Amos. And he's done this before. He found a heart condition on John Darrenbus, who is a long snapper from the Philadelphia Eagles who visited the Saints back then. And I think he even signed with the Saints. And then subsequent exams that John Amos saw found an aortic problem that needed to be it was a career-ending condition but required surgery. And it's probably saved John Darrenbus' life. And he's said that many times since then. So, yeah, hats off to John Amos. It's a pretty extraordinary story, an unfortunate story for Foster Moreau.
Yeah, unfortunate, but also, providential as well, because, maybe they got it early. And as you pointed out, it is treatable. And and hopefully he'll have a good prognosis and get through that. So as you sort of look at the Saints where they are now, do you see things sort of settling down now as we sort of move quickly toward the draft?
Yeah, look, I think they'll continue to add a few parts to the roster, but like I said before, this is the period of time where you're in the second, third weeks of the free agency. Players, all the money has been tapped out. Players are getting low-level deals. There's only a few big-name players left. They're going to be signing near the league minimum. So these are role players and depth players. You're not going to get any headliners at this point. They're turned their attention to the draft. Mickey Loomis, Jeff Ireland, Dennis Allen have all been on the road this week visiting pro days. They're Thursday, they're University of Alabama pro day. Wednesday, they were at Ohio State pro day in Columbus, Ohio. This is when they're kind of turning their attention to the draft and away from free agency. They'll still sign players, but again, they're going to be more secondary type backup players to fill out the roster as opposed to headliners.
Hey, listen, when I was in Alabama as president of the Alabama Media Group, it was, obviously I had responsibilities for newspapers across the state. And then, of course, AL.com was one of the strongest statewide sources in the United States. But the team that was covering Alabama did such a great job. We actually published, a couple of books, and I mean, just incredible work. But, when you mention Alabama, it's still amazing, really, when you think about the competition in college football these days. It's still amazing that Alabama continues to turn them out. We're actually at the end of this segment, end of this, but it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Hey, there's 12 head coaches were at the NFL head coaches with the Alabama Pro Day. That shows you how big time.
That is wild, man. Unbelievable talent coming out of that college. Anyway, Jeff Duncan, it's been a pleasure to see you, my friend.
Thanks, Ricky. We'll talk next week. Look forward to it.
You bet. Hey, when we come back on the other side, we're going to talk about oyster shells. We'll see you after this.